We are continuing our exploration into the world of AI in Java and Spring AI. Today we're working with something called functions. Now I want you to imagine a scenario where you're building out an AI assistant that can answer questions or give you facts about cities around the world. I'm here in Ohio, so I might ask, what is the largest city in Ohio? And the answer would come back with Columbus. What if I followed that up with, what is the current weather like in Columbus? Now we're going to have a problem, right? Because LLMs don't have access to real-time data. So how do we solve for scenarios like that? That's exactly what we're going to look at today. So we've been working with OpenAI. Here I am on the documentation site for function calling. In an API call, you can describe functions and have the model intelligently choose to output a JSON object containing arguments to call one or many functions. So we can declare one function, we can declare many functions that the LLM will realize that it needs to call to get access to some of this like real-time data. So here in the documentation, again, I mentioned this, but this is specific to GPT 3.5 Turbo and GPT-4. Here are some common use cases. You can create an assistant that answers questions by calling external APIs, like ChatGPT plugins. Maybe you want to send an email, maybe you want to get the current weather, convert natural language into API calls. This is really cool stuff. So I'll leave this documentation, go ahead and dig through this. Also, the Spring AI's documentation on this. So this is function calling. It goes into how it works, a quick start, how you can do this using plain Java functions. Again, we're going to write a lot of this today. The one thing I do want to look at is the Spring AI function calling flow. And this is basically how it happens. Like we send off a message to OpenAI, the LLM, and say, hey, what is the current weather like in Columbus? And it realizes that it can't do that. Normally it would just say, I can't answer that question. But in this scenario, we are providing a function callback for the LLM. And it's basically going to say, oh, I don't know how to answer this, but I do see that you provided a function. I'm going to send this back and have you call it. So there's this whole flow that happens. And if you were to build this out, say in JavaScript, talking to OpenAI's GPT-4, you do have to follow this. And again, this is in their documentation as well. How does this actually work? But the really nice thing about Spring AI is it's kind of encapsulated all of this for us. We just have to define a function, we add it to some chat model options, we pass it to our call method, and Spring AI handles all of this for us. So that's what we're gonna do today. We're gonna build out this kind of city assistant, and then we'll build out a custom function that can be called when you ask for something like the weather. So to get started, I'm going to head over to start.spring.io. We're going to build a new project today, but the link that I'm going to leave you in the description below is the GitHub repo with all my Spring AI examples in it that we've been working through. But this one will be just kind of a separate project that you and I can work on now. So I'm going to choose Java. I'm going to choose Maven, the latest version of Spring Boot, which is 3.2.5. I'm going to say dev.dan Vega. We'll call this functions. And let's go ahead and choose Java 21. I'll go ahead and choose web, and I'll go ahead and choose OpenAI. So there it is, and that's really all I need to get going with this. So with that, I will go ahead and generate a zip file, download that. You can open it up in whatever text editor ID you're most productive in. I'm going to open it up in IntelliJ Ultimate IDEA, and with that, friends, let's write some code. All right, so I'm going to start out by creating a new class. We're going to call this the city controller. This is going to be a REST controller. And like we have been doing, I think I probably should show you this again. We have been kind of doing this in every video that we've done on the AI stuff. But in application.properties, I've declared my OpenAI API key, and I've declared my chat model to be GPT-4. If this is kind of new to you, go back to the Spring AI introduction video where we kind of walk through all of this setup stuff. So I have that in place. I need a chat client. So I'm going to say private final chat client. We'll call this our chat client, and we'll get this through constructor injection, and we are ready to go. Let's write a method. We'll call this a get mapping for /cities, and this is going to return a string. We'll just call this cities. And this is going to take in a request param. We'll call this the message. and we'll assign this to a string called message. I'm not going to set a default value today. So the first thing I want is a system message. So I'm going to say new system message, and I'll say that you are a helpful AI assistant answering questions about cities around the world, right? Let's get a variable for that. Then I need a new user message. So user message, and that's going to be whatever we get from the argument to this controller method here. So now I have a system message and a user message. Now I can use the chat client to go ahead and call this. I'm going to create a new prompt here with a list of messages. So we'll have the system message and we'll have the user message. And from that, we should get a response. And from there, we can return the response.getResult.getOutput.getContent. So that will give us our string. So let's go ahead and see if everything works so far. So again, I'm going to do the same example that we talked about at the beginning. I want to ask it about some cities, and then I want to ask it about weather and see that it will not be able to answer that question. So let's go ahead and say HTTP. So again, this is HTTP IE, curl, but a little bit easier to use. So I'm basically making a curl request to localhost 8080/cities. And I need to provide a message in here in HTTP IE. You give it the parameter and then a double equals. We'll basically say I'm going to set this. So I'm going to say, what is the largest city in Ohio, where I am? And let's see, it's going to go off and think, and the largest city in Ohio by population is Columbus. That's great. Let's go ahead. Oops. Let's go ahead and do this. What is the weather currently like in Columbus? So I'm going to go off and realize that I don't know how to answer that. Sorry, as an AI, I don't have real-time capabilities to provide current weather updates. I would recommend checking a reliable weather website or app for the most accurate, up-to-date information. So what we want to do is we want to provide a way when the AI comes across these certain scenarios where it can't get up-to-date information, we can call a function for that. So we need to... There's a way to do that. Again, in the documentation, Spring AI is going to kind of show us how to do this. We can provide a function call to this checkclient.call. So we'll go ahead and set that up later. But first, we need to start with building out the actual functionality. So I'm going to start with a weather service. So let's go Java class weather service. And I will go ahead and create that. For this weather service, we're going to use this weather API. Now, you do have to sign up for this to get a key. Once you have the key, it's free to use. Let's go ahead and take a look at this real quick. So if we go in here and you provide a city, you can see the response here. Whoops, I think you have to... You might have to log in for this. Did this. So you can come into this Weather API Explorer. I can go ahead and type in Columbus here. Click Show Response. You'll see the call. It has my key in there. We'll make sure we delete that before we post this video, Dan. And then you can see the response. So we get all this information back, like the location. Where is this? So this is Columbus, Ohio. What is the current temperature? It has temperature Celsius, temperature Fahrenheit. It is going to get warmer out today. It does look a little chilly, but it is going to get close to 70 today. So we're excited about that. Now, I don't need all of this information. So when I go ahead and model out a response, I'll grab some of this location data, some of this current data, maybe the wind, but I'm not going to take all of this in a response. But this is the API that I'm going to work with today. So let's figure out how we can make this work. All right, the first thing I'm going to go ahead and set up is a weather, let's see this, weather config properties, and this is just going to hold, and actually I don't want that. I want this to be a record, and this is just going to hold the API key and the API URL. So API URL. We're going to give this configuration properties. We'll give it a value for a prefix of weather. And let's go ahead and enable this by going to, whoops, where are we? Let's say at enable configuration properties and then our weather config properties class. So now that that's set up, we could go into our application.properties, and I'll just paste a couple of values in here. So I am using that API key in an environment variable, even though I already kind of leaked it, but this will be okay. And then I have the URL. This is kind of the base URL that we're going to use. So now that I have my configuration properties, I can go ahead and use that in my weather service. So I'm going to need a couple things in here. The first of which is a logger. I have a logger for this weather service. I'm going to have those configuration properties. So let's call those weather props. And then I'm also going to need a REST client. We need to make a call out to this service, and I'm going to use the REST client in Spring Boot 3.2 and beyond to make that call. So let's just say add constructor parameters, and now we have those two set up. So, and actually this is not what I want here. I'm going to say REST client.builder. Actually, so we're going to back up on this a little. I do not need this in the arguments. What I'm going to do is actually create this. So REST client.create, and I'm going to give it a base URL, and that base URL is going to be the weatherprops.api URL. All right, the reason I'm not using the REST client builder, we'll see that in a minute. The way that I'm going to create this in this example will not allow me to auto wire that in. We can come back and fix that later, but I just want to start off simple. So once I have a REST client and I know where I'm talking to, I can go ahead and make a call. Now I'm going to paste in some records here because, again, I don't want to focus too much on this, but we're going to need a request and a response. Our request is really just going to contain the city that we care about. The response is going to contain that location and that current. Again, if I go back to, if I were to head back to the browser, if I were to head back to the browser and go over to this response, you could see we have things like location and current. And so I'm just kind of picking the things out of there that I want. So I have location and current. In location, I have the name, the region, the country, Latin long. For the current, I have the temperature in Fahrenheit, the condition, wind miles per hour, and humidity. And then the condition is like, hey, it's partly cloudy. So I want that text as well. So these are my responses that I'm going to work with in regards to the response from the weather API. So to call the weather API, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to create a new method here. And what I want to do is I want to implement a function. So function takes an input and an output. The input is going to be this weather service dot request, and the output is going to be this weather services dot response. So again, those are those records that I kind of had built in there. So once we do that, we'll have to implement the method. We're going to implement apply, and this is where we're going to make our call. And the reason we're doing this is what Spring AI is looking for. It's telling us to go ahead and create our functions as functions that take in an input and return an output. So we're going to do this, and then we'll see how we can kind of create that bean and then use that as part of our call to the chat client. So we're creating this function. We have this apply. It takes in a request. That request should have the city that we're worried about. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste this call in here. And let's just say request and request. So we are taking in that request. We're going to log that request so we know what we're getting in there. So I'm going to use the REST client to call this GET. the URI is going to be that base URL plus this. So we're saying key is equal to key, and that key is that API key. And then the Q is whatever is that coming in that request. So in this case, the city. So we're going to retrieve that, turn that into a response. Again, this is the response, and return that response. So this is what we want to return. So this service in and of itself, really outside of the fact that we're implementing a function, is just kind of a normal service that we'd write to contact the weather API, right? So now we need to kind of set up the function configuration. We got to define this function, and then we have to tell the chat client about it. So I'm going to go ahead and say function configuration, and I'm going to create a bean. This is in the documentation as well. You may want to provide a description for this. Get the current weather conditions for the given city, right? And again, this is more of what Spring AI is doing behind the scenes for us. This is something you have to do if you kind of write this out manually. You got to set up like a schema for whatever the function is. Part of that is a description, but Spring AI is doing that behind the scenes for us. So I'm going to create my function. So I'm going to say public function. Again, this is the weather service.request, and the output is the weather service.response. And we'll call this current weather function. This name is important, so remember that. So all we need to do here is create an instance of our weather service. And this is what we're going to return, because again, remember that class implemented a function. So we're going to say return new weather service. Now remember, weather service takes in weather config props. So we need to pass that in. So I'm going to come in here and say private final weather configuration props. We'll get this through, we'll create a constructor that takes this, and then we'll go ahead and pass this in. All right, so now that we have this bean with the name of current weather function, we should have everything we need to make this work. So what we're going to do is go back to this city controller. And in the city controller, we just need to do one thing. So we're going to go ahead and basically define the function or functions that we want to send off to GPT-4. So we're going to say OpenAI chat options. Now, if we look at this, chat options implements something called function calling options. Again, this is in the documentation, so take a look at this, but this one is specific to OpenAI. So we can say, we can get a builder for this. We can say with function. So now we just define the function that we want to send off, and we use the function name. So current weather function. Right? And then we go ahead and build this. I'll get a variable from this. We'll call this chat options. And now that I have chat options, I can simply pass it to this chat client.call, where one, we're passing a prompt, two, we can pass some chat options. So that is pretty much all we should be able to do. So let's go ahead and rerun this application. And I'm going to go back to the terminal. And again, I'm just going to rerun that same question. What is the weather currently like in Columbus? And we have an issue. That's okay. Let's see what's going on here. Functional bean with name current weather function does not exist in the context. So let's find out why that doesn't exist. Functional bean name with current weather function. I'm sure I just typed something wrong. So let's see. We don't need that. We don't need that. This is what we need. Current weather function. Did we put a bean on there? Yes, so this is a bean. This is what we did wrong, Dan. We need to make this a configuration class. So let's rerun this application, head over to the terminal and try that again. And what is the current weather like currently in Columbus, Ohio? The current weather in Columbus, Ohio, United States is sunny with a temperature of 48.2 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind speed is 5.6 miles per hour, and the humidity is at 62%. Awesome. So this was a really good example of, we didn't tell OpenAI's GPT-4 when it needs to call this function. It kind of figured that out on its own. It goes, you have a function that is able to determine the current weather, and you're asking me a question about that. I'm going to go ahead and send this back to you, have you call that and send that as context back to me. And now the LLM is able to answer that question. So I thought this was a really good example. The ability to call functions really provides a way to kind of bridge the gap on some of these things, like getting real-time data, being able to do things like send an email or send a notification. And Spring AI could make this easier. If you're really bored, go off and try to do this in something like JavaScript, straight talking to GPT-4. There's a lot involved to make this happen. And Spring AI does this all behind the scenes for us. So kudos to the Spring AI team. This is a pleasure to work with. So hey friends, if you found value in this, do me a big favor, leave me a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, happy coding.